Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Dr. Elizabeth. I want to start today with something I hear constantly in comment sections, in messages, in casual conversations with friends and even patients. I just quit sugar for 30 days. Will my skin actually change? It's become something of a trend, this idea of a 30-day sugar-free reset, often tied to promises of clearer skin, less puffiness, a brighter complexion, sometimes even framed as a complete skin transformation by the time the month is over, complete with dramatic before and after side-by-side photos designed to go viral. And I understand the appeal completely, genuinely. Cutting something out feels concrete, measurable, like a clean experiment you're running on your own body, with a clear start date and a clear finish line. There's something genuinely satisfying about a defined challenge with a defined endpoint, especially compared to the vague, open-ended nature of most skincare advice you typically encounter. But before you commit to a month of it purely for your skin's sake, I think it's worth actually understanding what the evidence says, rather than what a trending video with dramatic lighting and a triumphant reveal claims. So today, let's talk about this deeply. What sugar actually does inside the body, what a genuine connection between sugar and skin does and doesn't look like according to current research, and what a realistic evidence-based expectation looks like if you do decide to cut back for 30 days, rather than relying on someone else's dramatic reveal video as your guide. Let's start with the biology, because that's really where this whole conversation has to begin. When you eat sugar, or more broadly, foods that break down quickly into sugar in your bloodstream, your blood glucose rises, and your body responds by releasing insulin to help move that glucose into your cells, where it can be used for energy or stored for later use. This is a completely normal, healthy process that happens many times a day for everyone, regardless of what they eat. It's not something that only happens when you eat unhealthy food, and it's not inherently a problem in and of itself. The conversation around sugar and skin isn't about this process being inherently harmful. It's about what tends to happen when blood sugar spikes are frequent, large, and repeated over long stretches of time, particularly through foods and drinks that are very quickly absorbed, like sugary sodas, candy, and heavily processed snacks, as opposed to foods that release sugar into the bloodstream more slowly and gradually over a longer period. One of the more well-documented connections here involves a hormone related to insulin called insulin-like growth factor 1, often abbreviated as IGF-1. Research suggests that diets consistently high in rapidly absorbed sugars and refined carbohydrates are associated with higher circulating levels of IGF-1, and IGF-1 is generally understood to influence oil gland activity and skin cell turnover. Some research has found associations between diets with a high glycemic load, meaning diets that cause frequent, larger blood sugar spikes, and increased acne severity in certain populations, with some studies specifically looking at populations that shifted from more traditional, lower glycemic diets to more westernized, higher glycemic ones, and noting corresponding changes in acne prevalence. It's worth being precise here. This is generally described as an association in population-level research, not a guarantee that sugar causes acne in any individual person, since acne is influenced by many overlapping factors, including genetics, hormones, and skin type, all of which we've covered in detail in earlier videos on this channel. There's also a process called glycation that gets mentioned a lot in this conversation, and it's worth explaining clearly because it's often exaggerated in skincare marketing. Glycation is a natural chemical process where sugar molecules in the bloodstream can bind to proteins, including collagen and elastin, the same proteins we discussed in our video about the layers of skin. When this binding happens, it can form structures called advanced glycation end products, sometimes shortened to AGEs, which research suggests may make collagen and elastin somewhat stiffer and less flexible over time, similar to how a fresh, pliable rubber band can become stiffer and more brittle the longer it sits exposed to heat and light. This process happens gradually, over years, not over a single month of eating dessert, and it happens to some degree in everyone as a normal part of aging and metabolism, regardless of diet. Diets consistently higher in sugar are generally associated with a faster accumulation of these structures over the long term. But this is a slow, cumulative process, not something that visibly reverses or worsens within a 30-day window. It's also worth noting that AGEs can form through a couple of different pathways, including certain high-heat cooking methods like grilling, roasting, and frying, which is a reminder that glycation is a broader metabolic and dietary topic than just sugar intake alone, even though sugar tends to be the part that gets the most attention in popular skincare content and marketing. This is an important point to sit with because it directly affects what kind of results you should realistically expect from a short-term sugar cutback. The research connecting sugar to skin aging through glycation is generally describing effects that build up over years and decades of dietary patterns, not something that will visibly change your skin's firmness in a single month. It's worth pausing here to talk about something that rarely gets mentioned in these 30-day sugar challenge videos. What else tends to change at the same time as the sugar? When someone commits to a structured 30-day challenge like this, they often make a whole cluster of related changes simultaneously, not just the single variable they're focused on. Cutting sugary drinks often means drinking more water instead. Cutting dessert and sugary snacks often means eating more whole foods, which can mean more fiber, more vitamins, and more overall nutritional variety. People doing a structured challenge like this often also sleep a little more consistently, since they're paying closer attention to their habits generally. And some people reduce alcohol intake at the same time, since alcoholic drinks often contain significant amounts of sugar too. Many people also end up cooking more meals at home during a challenge like this, simply to have more control over what goes into their food, which tends to reduce sodium and processed ingredient intake as a natural side effect. Any of these accompanying changes, better hydration, more consistent sleep, reduced alcohol, more whole foods, could plausibly contribute to skin looking or feeling better on their own, independent of the sugar reduction itself. This is part of why it's genuinely difficult to say with confidence that sugar specifically, isolated from everything else that shifted during the same 30 days, was the reason someone's skin looked different by the end. This isn't meant to dismiss anyone's experience. It's meant to explain why personal results, even genuinely good ones, don't always tell us as much about sugar, specifically as they might seem to at first glance. I'll mention something from my own experience here. Years ago, I did a version of this challenge myself, mostly out of curiosity about the research, rather than expecting any particular dramatic result. I noticed my skin did feel a little calmer by the end of the month, but when I looked honestly at everything else that had changed, I was sleeping better, drinking noticeably more water, and had cut out a nightly glass of wine that I'd been having most evenings. I genuinely couldn't say with any confidence that the sugar reduction alone deserved the credit for what I was noticing. That experience is part of why I think it's important to be honest about how many variables are usually moving at once during a challenge like this, rather than attributing every change to the one thing that happened to be the headline of the challenge. So what actually might change in 30 days if you do cut back on sugar? This is where I want to be careful to separate what's plausible and evidence-aligned from what's an exaggerated marketing promise. For some people, particularly those who were consuming a lot of rapidly absorbed sugar beforehand, a meaningful reduction may be associated with somewhat calmer, less reactive skin, particularly if acne is a concern that's influenced by hormonal and inflammatory pathways in that individual. This isn't guaranteed for everyone, since, as we've discussed before, acne has many different contributing factors, and diet is only one piece of a much larger picture that includes genetics, hormones, skincare routine, and skin barrier health. Some people also report feeling like their skin looks a little less puffy or less inflamed after cutting back on very sugary, highly processed foods, though this is more commonly linked to broader dietary changes, like reduced sodium and processed food intake alongside the sugar reduction, rather than sugar reduction acting alone as a single isolated variable driving the result. It's genuinely difficult to isolate sugar specifically in real-world eating patterns, since cutting sugar often means cutting an entire category of processed foods at the same time, which makes it hard to know exactly which change is responsible for any effect someone notices in the mirror. There's also a more indirect pathway worth mentioning: sleep and energy. Large, frequent blood sugar spikes, followed by the crashes that often come afterward, are sometimes associated with energy dips and disrupted sleep patterns for some people, particularly when sugary foods are eaten close to bedtime. Since we've discussed in an earlier video how meaningfully sleep quality connects to skin's overnight repair processes, it's plausible that more stable blood sugar levels could indirectly support better sleep for some individuals, which could in turn have a modest, indirect relationship with how skin looks and feels the following day. This is a more speculative, indirect pathway compared to the more directly studied insulin and IGF-1 mechanisms, but it's a reasonable piece of the broader picture worth mentioning, and it's a good example of how dietary changes can influence skin through routes that have little to do with skin biology directly. What's less supported by current evidence is the idea that 30 days without sugar will dramatically clear long-standing acne, reverse visible signs of aging, or produce the kind of instant, glowing transformation often shown in short-form videos with dramatic before and after lighting and carefully staged angles. Skin conditions like acne are influenced by oil production, inflammation, clogged pores, and sometimes bacteria. And any of these mechanisms typically take more than a few weeks to meaningfully shift, partly because skin's own cell turnover cycle, which we discussed in an earlier video, takes roughly a month on its own just to complete one full cycle from start to finish. It's also worth talking about what quitting sugar actually means in practice, because this varies enormously from person to person, and that variation matters for what results are realistic. Some people interpret this as cutting out candy, soda, and desserts specifically. Others interpret it much more strictly, cutting out fruit, dairy, and any food containing naturally occurring sugars, sometimes even avoiding foods like carrots or beets because of their natural sugar content. From a general nutrition standpoint, naturally occurring sugars in whole foods like fruit come packaged with fiber, water, and other nutrients that generally slow down how quickly that sugar is absorbed into the bloodstream, which is a meaningfully different metabolic experience than the same amount of sugar consumed in a soda or candy, where there's little to nothing slowing down that absorption. Extremely restrictive interpretations of no sugar aren't necessarily more beneficial for skin, and can sometimes create an unnecessarily difficult, hard-to-sustain experience for very limited additional benefit, based on current evidence, while also potentially reducing intake of foods that offer other genuine nutritional value. Let's talk through a few common myths, because this topic tends to attract more than its fair share of oversimplified claims. Myth 1. Sugar directly causes acne in a simple, one-to-one way, the way an allergy might cause an immediate reaction to a specific food. The relationship between sugar and acne is generally described in research as an association tied to blood sugar spikes, insulin, and IGF-1 activity, not a direct, guaranteed cause and effect relationship for every individual. Many people with diets high in sugar don't develop significant acne, and many people with very low sugar intake still experience it because genetics, hormones, and other factors are also strongly involved, sometimes more strongly than diet in a given individual's case. Myth 2. Cutting sugar for 30 days will visibly reverse wrinkles or significantly improve skin elasticity. As we discussed, the glycation process tied to sugar and collagen stiffness happens gradually over years, not weeks. A short-term reduction is a reasonable, generally healthy habit to consider for many reasons, but expecting visible anti-aging results within a single month isn't well supported by how this biological process actually works. Myth 3. All sugar is metabolically identical, so cutting out fruit is just as important as cutting out soda. As we touched on, naturally occurring sugars in whole foods are generally absorbed differently than the concentrated, rapidly absorbed sugars found in sodas, candy, and many processed snacks, largely due to the fiber and other nutrients that come packaged alongside them in whole foods. Treating every source of sugar as equally significant isn't well supported by how digestion and blood sugar response actually work, and it can lead to unnecessarily restrictive eating patterns that eliminate genuinely nutritious foods for little additional skin-related benefit. Myth 4. If your skin doesn't dramatically improve after 30 days without sugar, it means you did something wrong, or that your body is somehow uniquely broken compared to everyone else who tried it. Given everything we've covered, the many contributing factors to skin appearance, the gradual nature of processes like glycation, and the difficulty of isolating sugar as a single variable, it would actually be more surprising for someone to see a dramatic, guaranteed transformation in exactly 30 days than for their results to be subtle, mixed, or simply not very noticeable at all. That's not a personal failure. It's a reasonably expected outcome given the underlying biology and timeline involved. Myth 5. Any skin improvement noticed during a sugar-free month proves sugar was the problem all along, and it should be avoided permanently and completely going forward as a strict rule. As we discussed, a structured 30-day challenge tends to shift several habits at once, not just sugar intake, which makes it genuinely hard to attribute a result to sugar specifically with much confidence. It's also worth noting that overly rigid, all-or-nothing approaches to food can be difficult to sustain long-term and aren't necessarily more beneficial than a more moderate, consistent pattern of eating that still leaves room for occasional sugar, without labeling it as a moral failure or a skin catastrophe every time it happens. So if you're still considering a 30-day sugar reduction after everything we've covered, here's how to think about it in a grounded, evidence-aligned way, rather than chasing a dramatic transformation you're unlikely to actually see. First, get specific about what you're actually changing. Broadly cutting out sugary drinks, candy, and heavily processed snacks is a reasonable, generally healthy adjustment for many people, independent of any skin-related goal, and it's a more targeted, sustainable approach than eliminating naturally occurring sugars from whole foods like fruit, which come with genuine nutritional benefits that are worth keeping in your regular diet rather than cutting out unnecessarily. Second, set your expectations around the actual research timeline. If you're hoping to notice anything skin-related, it's more reasonable to expect subtle changes in oiliness or reactivity, if any, rather than a dramatic before and after transformation, and it's worth remembering that any changes you do notice may be influenced by other factors that shifted alongside your sugar intake, like hydration, sleep, or stress levels during that same period, rather than sugar being the sole explanation for whatever you observe by the end of the month. Third, remember that diet is only one piece of the broader skin health picture we've built across this channel. Sun protection, a properly functioning skin barrier, consistent gentle cleansing, and appropriate moisturizing are all factors with more directly established, better documented effects on how skin looks and feels than a single dietary change over 30 days. So it's worth keeping those fundamentals firmly in place rather than expecting a dietary change to compensate for skipping them entirely. Fourth, if your primary motivation for cutting sugar is genuinely about your skin specifically, and particularly if you're dealing with persistent acne or another ongoing skin concern, that's a great reason to talk to a dermatologist, who can help you understand whether diet is likely to be a meaningful factor in your specific situation, alongside other treatment approaches that have more established evidence behind them for acne specifically, rather than relying on a dietary change alone to address a persistent concern that might respond better to a more targeted approach. Fifth, if you do decide to try a 30-day sugar reduction, doing it because it aligns with a broader, sustainable approach to how you want to eat, rather than purely chasing a dramatic skin transformation you're unlikely to see in that time frame, tends to be a more realistic and satisfying way to approach it, regardless of what happens with your skin specifically. Framing it around general well-being, energy levels, or simply genuine curiosity about your own habits and patterns can make the experience feel worthwhile, even if your skin doesn't visibly change much by day 30. And sixth, if you do notice a genuine improvement by the end of the month, consider testing it a little further before crediting sugar entirely. For example, by gradually reintroducing sugar in moderation afterward and paying close attention to whether anything changes again, rather than immediately assuming the entire effect was due to sugar alone, given everything else that likely shifted during the challenge at the same time, including sleep, hydration, and overall dietary quality. Quitting sugar for 30 days isn't a bad idea, and it may well come with genuine benefits for your energy levels, your broader eating pattern, or simply as a useful piece of honest self experimentation. But the evidence doesn't support it as a guaranteed skin transformation on that kind of short timeline. Understanding the real, gradual biology behind sugar's connection to skin, insulin, IGF-1, and the slow process of glycation gives you a much more honest picture than a dramatic thumbnail promising flawless skin in 30 days. And honestly, that honest picture tends to make it easier to stick with the change for the right reasons, rather than abandoning it in frustration when day 30 doesn't look like the video you were inspired by. If your skin does look a little different by the end of your own 30 days, that's genuinely worth noticing and appreciating, even if it's subtle, and even if you can't say with certainty exactly which of the several things you changed deserves the credit for it. And if it doesn't look dramatically different, that doesn't mean the effort was wasted, or that something about your body or your discipline failed. It simply means your experience lined up with what the underlying research would actually predict, which is a far more useful thing to know than a false promise ever was. If you found this helpful, consider subscribing to Skin Health Authority for more evidence based skin education explained clearly, honestly, and without the exaggerated promises.